6 young people barely managing to stand on their own feet, becoming independent from their families and taking refuge in their chosen families. Each other are far from the dreams they had for their 20s as children. What if I never succeed? What if I never find the love of my life? What if I disappoint my family? What if I have to betray my values? What if I never feel like a real adult? What if I never discover what I want in life? Can a show plant itself right in the middle of pop culture from its very first season? Sure it can, but maintaining that success consistently for 10 years isn't everyone's cup of tea. The Friends pilot episode was watched by 22 million people. It gave a generation a new hairstyle and way of speaking. Even for those watching 30 years after its release, the laugh track would be removed. As the 6 leads became stars over the years, they became real friends while it was hard enough just to maintain their working relationships. One person is now missing from the table. Memories remain. Now we're embarking on a journey from the 90s to today. Fasten your seatbelts, get a huge cup of coffee and your tissues ready. Let's begin. The golden age of 90s television. The 90s were the golden age of American television. Times when people didn't watch shows whenever they found time. They planned their time around the shows they followed. Thursday night was sitcom night, and Seinfeld was the star of that evening. Marta Kauffman and David Crane were 2 writers trying to find their place in this competitive environment. They'd also been close friends since their youth. When their sitcom family album was canceled, they decided to write a script about a group of single young friends instead of a family show. The 1992 film Singles, about young people living in one-room apartments in Seattle, sparked an idea in Marta and David's minds. The duo decided to adapt this script into a series, but they couldn't convince the director. When it came down to it, they started writing their own script from scratch. Inspired by the Singles film, they crafted a story in 3 days about 6 young characters coming together in an intimate, warm cafe setting, discussing their relationship problems and careers. The show's name at the time, based on a 7-page outline, was Insomnia Cafe. This name came from a sign that caught Marta's eye while driving with her husband in Los Angeles. She describes it like this: "That's when I understood what the show would be about. I remember describing the show in our pitch as too much caffeine. For me it still is. The battle with the network." After convincing producer Kevin Bright to join the project, they knocked on the doors of CBS and Warner Bros. CBS and Warner Bros. Liked the script but didn't like some choices. At that time, there wasn't a culture of hanging out in cafes among young people. For example, the main location of the ratings giant Seinfeld was a restaurant. Why take a risk when there was already something that worked? Putting 6 young characters as leads was also a risk. These 6 young characters represented Generation X, the Gen Z of those times. The show dealt with their problems. According to CBS, they needed an older character to connect viewers in their 30s, 40s, and 50s to the show. Thus began the battle of ideas and power between the writers and the studio. Marta was very protective and stubborn about her ideas. First, they decided not to compromise on the cafe and convinced CBS. They also tried adding an older character to the script, but it turned out so bad they described it like this: it was like a cop had entered among the young people giving them advice. Eventually, CBS backed down once again. Another issue was the show's name. When Insomnia Cafe wasn't liked, it became Friends Like Us, but CBS wasn't happy with this new name either. They thought it would be confused with the popular show of the time, Friends of Mine. The show's name was changed to 6 of 1 for a while. In fact, when the chosen 6 actors met for the first table read, the show's name was still 6 of 1. Actually, it was clear from the very beginning that this wasn't just any show. CBS approved the pilot episode on the condition that if they decided not to air the show, they would pay for it out of their own pockets, so their expectations from Friends were high. With this influence, it gained the Friends name that we now can't imagine otherwise. This Friends of Mine, which they were afraid would be confused with it, was forced to change its name to Ellen. Casting. Finding the perfect 6, the casting process took months, and was very painful. When word spread in the industry that Friends was CBS's new darling, managers were fighting with each other to get their actors into auditions. But Marta, David, and Kevin were very selective. They shuttled between Los Angeles and New York, watching 500 actors for each character. The real reason the auditions were so painful was the industry's superficiality. CBS and Warner Bros. Wanted these 6 people who would be leads and perform comedy to absolutely be attractive, sexy people. Moreover, it's a fact that it's much harder for society to laugh at attractive people. As you can understand, Marta, David, and Kevin were embarking on a journey to achieve the impossible. This magnificent cast, almost none of whom were famous, was formed after months of auditions and plenty of stress. Filming began in the summer of 1994. Friends had one feature that set it apart from other sitcoms. All 6 leads had equal screen time and equal importance to the script. Here's another big risk for the network. Worried that the audience would get confused trying to follow the characters, CBS distributed a copy of the script to everyone who came to watch before the pilot episode was filmed live, so they could follow the episode more easily, breaking boundaries. The biggest risk for CBS and Warner Brothers was that the show's 3 female leads were characters who freely lived their sexuality outside social norms. The pilot episode's main story goes like this. Monica sleeps with a guy on the first date. We watch what happens to Monica, the reactions of other characters to this situation, and the differences between men's and women's perspectives on sexuality. Okay, everything's great, but what if Friends got massively criticized and canceled from the very first episode? That's why CBS distributed a 1-question survey to the live audience who came to watch the pilot after filming finished. The question was, Monica, who had sex on the first date, is which of the following in your opinion? According to an interview Kevin and Marta gave, the options were like A. Prostitute, B. Slut, etc. You can imagine what Marta, who wrote the script inspired by her own life, felt. Fortunately, the audience proved to be far more open-minded than CBS, saying they had no problem with Monica's decision. But CBS still wasn't comfortable. That's why in the version of the pilot episode that's on air today, we watch Monica being manipulated by this man she slept with on the first date, realizing this days later and being upset. So Monica is portrayed as a woman who was deceived while dreaming of a long relationship. This choice made from the very beginning is what caused Monica and Rachel to be characters whose ultimate goal was marriage in other seasons. Yes, Marta and David had to make some compromises, but at the end of the day, what made Friends friends was their stubbornness in making space for a lesbian couple on 90s television. Instant success. The pilot episode, starting with Monica's line, "There's nothing to tell," was watched by 22 million people in America. It aired Thursday nights at 8, right after Mad About You and right before Seinfeld. The story takes place in New York, but every episode was filmed with a live audience at Studio 24 in Hollywood, which would later be renamed the Friends set. The first season passed with Friends' unstoppable rise. By the 6th episode, it had overtaken the famous sitcom of the time, Mad About You, in ratings. Soon it entered the top 10, then the top 5. Radio stations played the theme song "I'll Be There For You" by the Rembrandts, until people were sick of it. Magazines and channels were begging the actors to give interviews. Everyone started making jokes with Chandler's intonation. The most requested haircut at salons was the Rachel. No one knew at the time, but this hairstyle had come about by chance when Jennifer Aniston had a friend cut her hair with clippers. When the show started, none of them were famous except Courtney Cox, and Courtney couldn't be called a Hollywood star either. After the press screening of the first episode, right before it aired on television, their director Jim Burrows took them to Las Vegas on his private jet and said, "Your lives are going to change completely. So do some things now while you can still do them in front of everyone. Because soon, when you're famous, you'll never be able to do these things again." He was very, very right. Behind the scenes, the real stories. David Schwimmer, Ross Geller. David Schwimmer was the son of a middle-class lawyer family who was passionate about theater. He had appeared in a few sitcoms in Hollywood, but the shows always got canceled. He didn't really love the television world either. When he had completely closed his Hollywood chapter and returned to Chicago to do theater, he got a call from his manager. They wanted to see him for the role of Ross in CBS's favorite show. Although David Schwimmer wasn't interested in this offer at all, he couldn't resist the insistence of Marta and David, who had watched him at another audition before and wrote the Ross character thinking of him. Moreover, Friends would be filmed with a live audience similar to theater, and there would be no difference between the 6 leads. Thus, David Schwimmer became the first member chosen, Courtney Cox. Monica Geller. Courtney Cox was already famous. She had appeared in Family Ties and played Jim Carrey's partner in a film, but she was best known from the music video for Dancing in the Dark. Of course, these didn't bring Courtney fame that would be remembered for years, but they had made her enough money to buy a house. In fact, she was investing her savings by buying houses, renovating them, and selling them. Courtney, who was considered for the Rachel role by Marta and David, thought that the obsessively organized, detail-oriented Monica was much more suitable for her. She was also someone who lived an orderly, planned life. She insisted on this and landed the Monica role. Jennifer Aniston. Rachel Green. Jennifer didn't have much in common with Rachel. She wasn't rich or privileged from her family. She started acting school at 15, and until the Friends adventure that started at 25, the longest-running show she'd been in had stayed on air for 19 episodes. She'd even taken a role in a terrible horror movie that did more harm than good to make money. The secret to her being able to play Rachel so well lay in observing upper-class people while attending the private school where her mother worked. They were all very beautiful, tall and thin. They made an impact when I was 12 that I could never forget. Lisa Kudrow, Phoebe Buffay. Lisa Kudrow was the daughter of a famous doctor father who had a degree in biology. Her life seemed laid out before her, but she was looking for something else. SNL comedian Jon Lovitz was a family friend and was the one who discovered her natural comedy talent. Lisa joined an improv group and immediately shone. She started playing a waitress named Ursula on Mad About You. Yes, you got it right. The origin of Phoebe's evil twin Ursula in Friends. Thanks to her comedy talent and the Ursula character, Lisa had been cast in the Roz role in the famous show Frasier of the time before landing the Phoebe role in Friends, but she was fired before she had a chance to play it. Fortunately, Marta and David could see the gem in her. Matt LeBlanc, Joey Tribbiani. Matt LeBlanc was a former construction worker who had moved to Los Angeles, hoping his good looks would pay off as a model. When he appeared in an award-winning Heinz commercial, he used the money to buy himself clothes and a motorcycle, but things were progressing much slower than he expected. A year before the Friends idea came to David and Marta's minds, in 1992, he had appeared in a softcore erotic film and went to Friends auditions with the last $11 left in his bank account. What got Matt LeBlanc chosen for the Joey role wasn't his acting, but his good looks. CBS insisted that all 6 members of the friend group look good, and that the playboy character Joey be sexier than all of them. Matt LeBlanc was chosen by the studio despite Marta and David's objections, and joined the cast. Good thing he did. Thanks to all these experiences, he brought to life Joey, who was initially written as just a handsome bad boy. His biggest difference from Joey was that he was hardworking, punctual, and disciplined like a bee. Because unlike Joey, he didn't have a Chandler to lean on. Matthew Perry, Chandler Bing. Matthew Perry had signed a contract to appear in another show shortly before Friends auditions began. The only reason he was going to appear in a show called LAX 2194, which featured alien characters played by dwarves in airport adventures and also included a robot, was that he was broke. When he read the Friends script, he couldn't audition for the Chandler character, which made him feel like someone followed me for a year, stole my jokes, copied my mannerisms. Yet Chandler seemed tailor-made for him. All the actors around him agreed on this. All his friends who were going to auditions would first knock on Matthew's door and get tactics from him on how to play Chandler. Matthew Perry was looking for a way to be released from the Alien show and participate in auditions. The Chandler role was initially won by Matthew's close friend Craig Bierko. Fortunately, he received an offer from another show at the same time, and Craig made the mistake of his life by choosing the other show. Matthew Perry's dreams came true. The Alien show was thrown in the trash before it even started its broadcast life, along with all contracts, and Matthew delivered a great Chandler performance in front of Marta without even needing to hold the script in the interview he barely managed to get. The role was his. The last piece of the 6-piece puzzle was thus in place. Season 2, The Backlash. When the second season started, it was time for the crew to meet the bad sides of fame. Their faces were everywhere, and the press had a habit of making money by first polishing fame and then burying it. The Diet Cola commercial they did became the last straw for those who were more than ready to say, "We're sick of seeing these people everywhere." Matt LeBlanc describes that period like this: "At that time, there was no concept of press backlash in my vocabulary. Everything was surreal. We were on the covers of magazines. They had all begged us to be on those covers. We said, why not, of course. All we were trying to do was promote the show. The others were also disappointed. The crew made a decision among themselves. They wouldn't accept every invitation or every offer anymore. They would be less in the public eye. They would turn a deaf ear to reactions. They would only concentrate on their work." Some of the criticisms were also about the 6 young characters in Friends freely living their sexuality. Those who weren't happy about this said it should at least air later at night. Actually, for eyes that wanted to see, there were very beautiful messages in the show about both friendship and romantic relationships. For example, although the Joey character was initially written as a womanizing playboy, Matt LeBlanc had asked himself this question from the very beginning. If Joey is such a character, why would these women be friends with Joey? Thus, Joey became a character who didn't carry an ounce of toxic masculinity. Marta and David were also very careful that Joey's flirtatiousness didn't reach a threatening level. The person most affected by the reactions, ridicule, and humiliation that came with fame was undoubtedly Matthew Perry, because his situation was a bit different from the others, but this would remain a secret for a while longer. Equal pay. a revolutionary stand. At first, all 6 leads were earning $22,500 per episode. When the show shook up the ratings from the very first season, this fee became very low. In the first season, the name that received the most praise from critics and shone the most was David Schwimmer. That's why he started earning more than the others in the second season. The fees they received had become variable, ranging between $20,000, and they probably didn't know how much each other was earning. Just as companies warn white-collar employees not to tell each other their salaries under any circumstances, the same logic applied here. Exploit as much as you can exploit. David, who was convinced to play in Friends only because they were a team of 6 people, realized that this situation could cause problems in the future and said they should all agree on one amount and demand equal raises from the studio. They negotiated, saying all for one, one for all. This meant their solidarity wouldn't just be lip service. Before the third season started, they fixed their fees at $75,000, all equal. Warner Bros. Of course fixed everyone's fees at the level of the lowest earner, so actually David Schwimmer had agreed to earn less for equality. They raised their fees to $85,000 in the 4th season, $100,000 in the 5th, $125,000 in the 6th, $750,000 in the 7th, and $1 million in the 9th. Even though they had the same screen time, it was an industry norm for female actors to earn less than male actors. There were plenty of male actors earning $1 million per episode, but no female actors. Thanks to the Six's demand for equal pay, by the time they reached the last season, Jennifer, Courtney, and Lisa became television's highest-paid female actors. This process wasn't very easy, of course. When necessary, they made the decision not to go to table reads together. They all got up from the table together. They also had to deal with Warner Bros. And CBS's war tactics. Whenever the team tried to negotiate for their fees, the press started trashing them and exposing their earnings. David Crane says this about the situation. Maybe this was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. He couldn't say more to avoid a lawsuit, but let me say it. No, of course it wasn't a coincidence. They knew very well the anger that mentioning this money, which an ordinary person couldn't even dream of, would create in society. They carefully used the press to create social pressure on the actors. What they hid from society was that when the actors demanded $1 million per episode before the 9th season, each episode was being watched by an average of 24.7 million people and was making the network billions of dollars from commercials. So actually the actors were asking for what they deserved. Fortunately, they got it. In fact, in addition to increasing their fees, each actor became entitled to a 0.5% share of the royalties from Friends reruns. 0.5% may seem like a small percentage, but it amounts to about $5 million. This process wore everyone out. They had to have tense meetings with executives and then immediately film their scenes in front of a live audience. According to David Schwimmer, he didn't approach this issue as emotionally as the others. Since his family were lawyers, he was more familiar with corporate strategies than the others. Matthew Perry's hidden battle. In 1996, while a years-long solidarity was growing behind the cameras, an emotional third season was filmed in front of the cameras, including Ross and Rachel's breakup. Courtney Cox's future husband, David Arquette, was a guest actor this season. Legendary names like Billy Crystal and Robin Williams also stopped by the show this season. The actors were inseparable, eating together and playing poker during breaks on set. In this scene, everything seemed fine except for Matt LeBlanc's arm dislocating. What they didn't know was that Matthew Perry's alcohol and substance addiction, which had started years ago, was now out of control. But this would continue to remain a secret for a while. If you've watched Friends, you've probably noticed that Matthew Perry got very thin at the end of the 3rd season. In fact, if you look at the last episode of the 6th season and the first episode of the 7th season, you'll understand better what I mean. Matthew Perry, wearing the same clothes because the proposal scene continued, looks like a completely different person because he lost 20 kilos between the 2 seasons. He summarizes the physical changes he experienced during the series like this. If my weight is increasing, my alcohol addiction is at work. When I'm thin, it's my pill addiction. When I have a goatee, there are too many pills involved. Matthew's story. A tragic truth. Matthew Perry told all this and more in his book published in 2022, a year before his death. Like all addicts, nothing in his life, no matter how much he wanted it, could occupy more space than his addiction. He came face to face with death many times. His organs failed. He was even taken to intensive care once. He spent millions of dollars on both pills and hospitals and rehabilitation centers. In the years he was sober, he used his money to help addicts who weren't as lucky as him. That was his purpose in writing the book too. Due to health problems he experienced in his last years, he had difficulty pronouncing words properly. But actually, it was a miracle that he was even alive. That's why he wanted to leave a book where he told millions of people around the world trying to fight addiction what he experienced without filters. And honestly, when you read his book, you might feel like the guy kicked away every opportunity that came his way. He could never give up alcohol and drugs. He left everyone halfway. In fact, when I said I read his book, I saw people in DMs on Instagram saying Matthew was spoiled, that he got away with attributing his bad choices to his addiction. I understand very well why people think this way, but I think we don't understand what addiction is like. I hope we never understand it either. Matthew Perry was born as the son of an actor father, who was the young face of Old Spice brand, and a woman who was Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's press advisor, and a former beauty queen. In the 60s, when baby Matthew wouldn't stop crying and the family couldn't find a solution, they went to the doctor. The doctor prescribed a type of drug for the baby whose long-term effects were not yet known. The baby no longer cried constantly, but no one yet knew how heavy the price of this would be. When his father left him and his mother and settled in Los Angeles to become an actor, Matthew was still a baby. Being abandoned by his father and his mother's indifference toward him in her busy work life created traumas in Matthew that he would try to heal for a lifetime. When his mother remarried and started a new family, Matthew started to feel even more alone. The survival method he developed in childhood became the building block of his entire future and career, attracting attention, making people laugh, and making everyone love him. When Matthew had his first drink at 14, he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten instantly. So this is how normal people always feel, he thought. At 15, he left his family in Canada, where he never felt like a part of anyway, and moved to Los Angeles to his father's place. The idea of becoming a very famous actor and winning the admiration of the whole world started to take root in his mind exactly during this period. In his book, Matthew Perry says he read a news story about famous actor Charlie Sheen getting into trouble 3 weeks before Friends filming started, and thought, why is he dealing with these things? After all, he's famous. Like most people who want to be famous, he was under the delusion that fame would sweep away all troubles. Then he prayed, God, you can do whatever you want to me. Please make me famous. He didn't know at the time how open-ended the do whatever you want carte blanche he gave God in exchange for becoming famous was. When Friends achieved massive success, his friend Craig Bierko, who refused the role despite being chosen for Chandler, didn't talk to Matthew for years. The third member of their friend group, Hank Azaria, was included in the show as Phoebe's partner. The reality of Matthew, whom everyone envied, was very different. He was more than willing to give everything he had to get rid of his addictions and psychological problems. Matthew had started the beginning of the third season with 12 pills a day and increased the number to 55 by the end of the season. When he wasn't on set, he spent all his time finding this many pills. In fact, for a period, he started visiting houses that were for sale as if he were a buyer and rummaging through their bathrooms. He knew no one would suspect famous Matthew Perry of stealing medicine from bathrooms. He ended his relationship with Julia Roberts, who came as a guest actor in the third season, and admired him himself, thinking that he would be abandoned sooner or later and couldn't handle it, just like he did in his other relationships. At this time, none of the Friends actors, his family, or even his friends knew about Matthew's addiction. The more Matthew hid this situation, the more the shame he experienced grew. The first person to understand his condition was his ex-girlfriend. One night on the phone, with the courage to tell her everything, Matthew went to rehab at 26 between seasons. He managed to stay sober for a while, but he started drinking again during the 4th season and drank every night until the 8th season. When he was working, he actually didn't drink anything, but he was always like he was sick, both because he was hungover and because his body couldn't handle it anymore. In fact, in one scene, he fell asleep and woke up when Matt LeBlanc nudged him when it was his turn. Matthew explains the support of his crewmates in his book like this: in nature, when a penguin is injured, the other penguins gather around it and support it until it heals. That's exactly what my co-stars on Friends did for me. Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry's acquaintance went back to before Friends. In fact, Matthew had a big crush on Jen, but Jen had politely kept her distance. When the show started, Matthew made a lot of effort to bury his crush on Jen in his heart. When Jen's relationship with Brad Pitt, who would later also come to the show as a guest actor, began, Matthew's last remaining hope also went down the drain. When Matthew's condition became more apparent on set and caused concern, the person who came to his room to talk to him was Jennifer Aniston, which was even more devastating for Matthew. When he asked how they knew, Jen said, "We can smell it." This happened during the 7th season, when things really got out of hand. Matthew was taking a bottle of vodka and countless types and numbers of pills every day at that time. With the shame of everyone on set learning about his situation, he accepted a movie offer to be filmed in Dallas and tried to juggle this with Friends, but everything got even worse. He was in such bad shape that he couldn't say his lines properly, in both Friends and Serving Sarah. He urgently went back to rehab. He was now in such a difficult situation that some rehab centers wouldn't take him on the grounds that he was a severe case. On March 25, 2001, while everyone was watching Chandler and Monica's wedding on television, Matthew Perry was in rehab, and this was still a secret hidden from the public. The 8th season passed with this struggle. Matthew had tried countless ways to get rid of his addictions, spent months in rehab, tried many treatment and detox methods. When filming for the 9th season started, he was now sober. This season became the season when Chandler shined. He was nominated for an Emmy. In his book, he says, "What did I do differently that season? I listened. I didn't just stand there waiting for my turn to speak." After Friends ended, Matthew Perry unfortunately returned to his old habits. Although he continued to spend millions to get treatment, he couldn't completely get rid of his addictions. In fact, other addicts he sponsored stayed sober longer than him. In the 2020 reunion, Matthew confessed one more thing. While filming Friends, he felt like he was going to die after every joke that didn't make the live audience laugh. All his need for approval and love collapsed on him like a weight. Maybe if God hadn't granted his wish, he'd still be alive today. Who knows? The later seasons, Maturation and Farewell. The 4th and 5th seasons were Friends' maturation seasons. When Lisa got pregnant, Phoebe also became pregnant. With pregnancy, mood swings were added to the Phoebe character, who was just weird in the early seasons, and the Phoebe everyone loved emerged. Perhaps the London episodes, which were among the best episodes ever, were also in the 4th season. When Monica and Chandler came out from under the bedspread, the live audience applauded and shouted for so long that the duo had difficulty continuing the scene. The reason they went to London was that there were so many Friends fans in England. Sarah Ferguson, who would later have her connections with Jeffrey Epstein exposed, and who was being dragged through the mud by the press after divorcing Prince Andrew, was also a guest actor in this episode. According to her, appearing in Friends during this difficult period did her a lot of good. In the 5th season, they had a big 100th episode celebration. At that point, Friends had entered among the highest-grossing shows, and Marta, David, and Kevin had undertaken the creation of 3 more shows. While scenes were being filmed with live audiences, if the audience didn't laugh at a joke, the writers would urgently get together and rewrite. According to Marta, on some days they worked so much that they caught morning traffic on their way home from work. The chemistry between characters and actors was also at its peak during this period. Matthew Perry could have Chandler say, "I'm going to die alone," 4 episodes after saying it in his own life. The characters and actors' lives seemed to intersect at one point. In the 6th season, Bruce Willis, with whom Matthew Perry had filmed a movie, came as a guest actor. Real Ralph Lauren played Rachel's boss Ralph Lauren in the show. In the 7th season, Friends hosted legendary names like Susan Sarandon and Winona Ryder. In fact, in the episode Susan Sarandon played, the person who played her daughter in the show was really her daughter. She wanted to take a small role because she was a Friends fan. Meanwhile, the press's cycle of first praising then criticizing Friends continued. The team had coined a name for the transition to the praising part of this cycle, Friendessence. America was constantly losing Friends and then rediscovering it. The 8th season started very shortly after the September 11 events. The public, going through stressful days, had clung to escapism and to Friends, which coincided exactly with this period. Ratings skyrocketed again. Friends, which had surprisingly received very few awards throughout its broadcast life, finally managed to win the Emmy in the Best Comedy category this season. Yet it had become a big enough show that even a guest actor who appeared in a single episode could change their life. A decision they made this season out of ratings concerns became the show's most hated storyline even 30 years later, Joey and Rachel's love. This decision didn't sit well with the actors either. They objected to the writers, but such surprises were needed for the ratings war on television. When Jennifer won an Emmy in the 8th season, in her thank you list was Inger, the set chef who always prepared great meals for them. The 9th season was like a semi-final. Actually, all the actors were ready to end it this season. Only Matt LeBlanc didn't want to. Still, when the producers decided to continue, no one objected. They also responded to criticisms about there being no black characters in the show by including Aisha Tyler, who first played Joey's partner and then Ross's this season. For a while, Aisha Tyler dealt with calming down fans who came up to her on the street angry that she came between Ross and Rachel, and the final bells were ringing. The final season and beyond. The crew appeared on the Newsweek cover to announce they would be ending and conducted an emotional Oprah interview. Actually, they were all ready to close the Friends chapter and start a new period of their lives. Matthew Perry had been begging the producers for the last few seasons not to have Chandler talk like Chandler anymore. The person who most wanted the show to end was Jennifer Aniston, who had a long and sparkling career ahead of her, but she was also the one who cried the most on the last day of filming. They had filmed a total of 237 episodes. They had become like family. In the last scene, they all left their keys on the counter and left Monica's apartment for the last time. Matthew had asked Marta to write the show's last line for him. That's why in the last scene, when Rachel said, "Let's get coffee," Chandler made the audience laugh one last time by saying, "Sure, where?" Then they turned around and waved. They hugged and cried. They wrote notes on the set walls. The set would be torn down the next day because a new show's filming would start, until it was rebuilt for the reunion filmed in 2020. The actors had a difficult road ahead. The fame of their characters far exceeded their own names. The films they appeared in while continuing Friends hadn't helped much either. The person who shed Rachel and turned her name into a brand was undoubtedly Jennifer Aniston. David Schwimmer had become interested in directing behind the camera. He directed many episodes in the final seasons of Friends. He planned a career where he wasn't in the public eye as much as before. Matt LeBlanc was very happy with regular work and regular income. As far as he was concerned, they could have filmed Friends for 10 more seasons. That's why a series was made for him telling Joey's adventures after Friends. But it only lasted 2 seasons. Lisa Kudrow had always been passionate about acting, not fame. She continued to appear in comedy work from time to time. Courtney Cox had undergone a series of plastic surgeries from a very young age because of the youth and beauty pressure women are subjected to. She told millions of women about her regrets on this subject to raise awareness. Matthew Perry was found dead in his home pool in 2023 with an overdose of substances in his body. Actually, he was taking this substance for treatment, but he had taken many times more than the dose required for treatment. This incident turned into a case where doctors and nurses who abused their duties were tried. His mother, stepfather, and siblings established an association to continue his goal of helping addicts. The legacy lives on. They're all still very close friends, especially Jen, Lisa, and Courtney meet often. When they get together, they never fail to video call Matt LeBlanc. Jen still can't talk about Friends without her eyes welling up. Lisa wrote the foreword to Matthew's book. The memories Matthew left behind live on in all their minds. Friends stands as an ode to failure, to finding the strength to fight anyway, to friendship and to the uncertainty of your 20s, waiting for us on the side whenever we need to see these things, and it always will. That's all from me for today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't hold back on the likes and the comments you'll leave below. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video. Take care.